we're dealing with the kind of racism that we usually break down in two categories. One kind of racism is manifested in what we call individualized racism. Another kind is what we call institutionalized racism. And we're dealing with both kinds now.
They have not really had to confront this kind of issue before, face to face, because of the small black population in Canada.
In your opinion, do you believe there is some racism in this university?
Well, there is racial discrimination in this city, there is racial discrimination on this continent, and I would be very much surprised if the university was made up of a group of angels, whereas we know full well that our society is not. If there is racial discrimination in this university, I will make up my mind on this when I hear the evidence under due process to this effect.
February 1969. For 2 weeks, hundreds of students barricaded themselves in the university's computer center. They were protesting the alleged racism of a university professor. What started out as a peaceful protest turned into ugly violence when the occupants allegedly set the building on fire and destroyed the computers with axes. 97 protesters faced a variety of criminal charges. Many of those charged were from the Caribbean. The Sir George Williams incident had a greater effect on Canadians than the surface details would suggest. The Computer Center riot has gained an almost mythical stature as a turning point for race relations in Canada.
The Sir George event is a story of a whole bunch of circumstances that came together. None of the individuals really mattered. The individuals were all part of a mosaic, and they represented a story that is embedded in the entire larger community.
I think basically what happened with me is that I was frustrated at the time in around 65, 66 in Trinidad and Tobago. I wanted something else. I wanted to explore other possibilities. And the idea came that, look, I would have to get out of Trinidad. When I began applying to Canadian universities, Sir George Williams did something that really caught me. They were asking me things like what kind of music I like, whether I'm an introvert. And I felt that this here was a situation where these people began to make me feel that I could belong here.
Hey friend, come on over, looking for happiness, this is the place.
When I came to Canada, I did not view myself as an immigrant. I thought of myself as moving from one part of the British Empire to the other. I came to Canada with little race consciousness because Barbados was a small island, never changed hands, always British, with a very homogeneous population. So when I think about it now, it was a little bit amusing and didn't at all prepare me for what I was to find.
Montreal, to the whole world, Canada says, come to the fair. Expo 67, greatest trade exhibition in history, is open.
Here's the whole world in colorful miniature. All the pavilions have exciting differences, but over them all there's exciting oneness, a common denominator that is human and welcoming.
The was a great promise of diversity. And remember, this is all new language. When I was growing up, the term would have been the universal brotherhood of men.
The people who are coming here with an open mind will have a chance to measure themselves at a dimension that is far greater than that dimension that they are normally measuring themselves to. We have here 70 countries who will be here with a different color skin, a different language, a different tradition, a different architecture, a different way of life, a different political system.
The promises can never, ever match up to the reality of existence. And for those people who might have conflated Expo 67 with the Canadian experience, well, that would have been an error of judgment.
My immediate horror was trying to get a place to rent. I remember on a couple of occasions using the newspaper and calling places and tell me, come and see the place. And when I go, the first thing they tell me, oh, this is a sorority house. We're so sorry we didn't tell you that, you know? And a number of experiences of that. And I realized to myself, I said, you know something, it would seem to me as though Canadians are racist, but that they like to apologize for being racist.
There was a pattern of behavior that was brought to my attention in the academic year of 1966-1967.
We met Anderson in a course that was preparing us for medical school.
And if you had any illusions about going on to medicine, you needed that course.
Anderson was a lecturer who missed most of his lectures, so we had to study on our own. Anderson never, ever supervised us in the labs. But with the times he did come there, he would continuously address us as Mr. Ballantyne or Mr. Mossop. Whereas he would address the white students as John, Mary, or so forth. About 8 or 9 black students were being failed regularly. And we couldn't understand what was the motivation for it.
Had we been a group of white English immigrants who were feeling alienated, there would never have been the assumption that because these people are immigrants, they are somehow intellectually inferior to the average student. That would never have been the narrative. It's not as if somehow I was a failing student. None of us were failing students. We just hit the brick wall of failure when it came to Perry Anderson's class.
My personal experience is that I did some labs. I was very meticulous with lab work and submitted them. These same labs were copied by about 3 students, word for word. I got 7s for my labs, and these students got 10s.
Somewhere along the line, at the basis of all of this are elements that can be construed as racism. And so, to shorten the discussion, that is what was then the charge. When I came, I was a stranger. The essential quality of the community was a coldness.
I became instantly aware that I was the other. It was a really sharp demarcation from one state to another. And as the other, you could not go anywhere without being watched.
We as students feel that we have a right to be heard, that our issues should at least be aired, that we should have a hearing. So in April of '68, there were 14 of us who went to present our case.
I am interested in the fact that it took from April of '68 until December of that year to force this issue, which is an issue vital to the life of any university, to the fore. It seems during that period to me that the black students acted with forbearance, with intelligence, in a situation which must have been a situation of immense frustration.
The university decided that they would set up a committee to investigate. They wanted to resolve the problem within the university administration.
This hearing committee was supposed to reconvene a meeting to go back over the charges. That hearing committee comprised of 2 black professors, 2 white professors, and 1 professor, I think it was Professor Menon of East Indian heritage.
We accepted to be there because in part we wanted to make sure that the students had a fair hearing.
Our job was to gather information from the students concerning the claims that they made, and also gather information from the professor to make a judgment. That didn't sit too easy with me. You can't be the judge and the jury at the same time.
The position that the 2 black professors were in was untenable.
And the students were very smart. They made sure that we couldn't function because they confronted me on the mezzanine. 4 of them confronted me on the mezzanine with crazy charges and call you sellout, traitor, this, that, which got me so angry that I almost got into a fight. And at that very moment, that was it. It means I could not sit in and receive information and make judgment about it. So that's how it happened, that we got off the committee.
As a minority individual, we are constantly struggling with the majority's notion of who we are. The question that the individual faces is, in order to be authentic, how much of that interpretation by the other do you absorb? How do you then react against it?
My father is Omowale Ndongo. He was known as Omowale even during the Sir George incident. His name is Kennedy Fredericks. His birth name was Kennedy Fredericks.
Kennedy was hoping to get good grades, especially in bio, to go on to a medical degree. And this thing was really devastating to him.
Father was definitely involved from the beginning. When they accused this professor of racism. I grew up with the Sir George affair being just a part of my narrative, and I was just always aware of it. Anytime somebody would repeat to me the story, they would say, oh, and they wanted to charge him with everything, kidnapping and all these things, but nobody actually went into detail. Why kidnapping?
What I remember specifically is that they were fed up, and so that Kennedy and these other guys decided they would go to the rector's office, which was the acting director at the time, O'Brien, and demand, literally, that's the language they use, these are our demands, we are demanding this, we are not leaving here until we get answers to this question. And they did not allow him to leave, or he felt that he could. If you are told for all your life that blacks are violent, and then the 5 blacks turn up in your office and say, either you answer me or else you're not leaving here. How are the neurons in your brain connected to interpret that?
The manner of West Indians is somewhat more expansive than in our own. They tend to speak with large gestures. They tend to laugh, immoderately perhaps. The language is very picturesque, choice, frequently obscene, but nowadays, of course, since nobody seems to object to that kind of language, no one took it all that seriously. And we were assured, therefore, that it would be wrong on our part, it would be overreacting if we took what the students were saying at its face value.
That as a human being, you were devalued. And devalued in a manner that did not give you many, if any, opportunities to redress it. That somewhere along the line, the implicit assumptions of slavery had become institutionalized. You were supposed to be voiceless. You were supposed to simply accept whatever was dished out to you, simply because it was decreed by. At some point, it becomes very difficult to sit back and to accept that.
It is said that if you are white, you are right. If you're brown, stand around. And if you're black, get back. Is this the general feeling of the St. George students now? No. Well, when I came into school this morning, when I came into St. George as a past Georgian, I was most surprised and shook up. I never thought that at any time I would see a display of bigotry as what took place at the cafeteria yesterday. Niggers go home. That was the sign that was posed around at the cafeteria yesterday. What is significant about this sign is that only last week in your parliament, in your just society, one member of parliament got up and said something pretty similar to that. He was saying that they should send the Caribbean students back home.
In a sense, we're all our brothers' keepers at that time. And so all of these were simply opportunities to show solidarity with people who suffered from similar constraints by a system that was determined through power, class, opportunity.
I was self-righteous, of course, because I'd been, dissed in a very negative way and an anti-Semitic way, and so the cop was, and here I am, this 12-year-old little guy in this big tall cop, and he's trying to get us to move on, and I'm saying, well, no, I'm not going anywhere until you arrest that guy, you know, because he called me a dirty Jew, you know. Cop looks at me like I'm crazy, and so he's trying to scare me into just moving on. So he swings open the back door. He says, "Do you want to get in? Have me take you to the police station?" I said, "Yeah." So he took me to the police station and made me sit there for a couple of hours, then called my father. This is Sunday. My father's not a happy camper. He shows up, and then they're all telling my father about how I'm rude and I was disrespectful to the police officer and on, and I'm trying to say something, you know, like tell my father what happened, and everybody's saying, "No, shut up, shut up." My father is telling me to keep quiet anyway. So at the end of it, they're going to set a date for juvenile court and this whole thing going on, and then we leave. And we're walking out the door, and we're walking down the street towards home, and you know, and I said to my father, "Well, Dad, you didn't let me speak, you know. I mean, the man who yelled at us called me a dirty Jew." My father's face just blanched. He turned around, grabbed my hand, walked me back in to that police station, walked up to the desk sergeant and said, "I want the name of the person who called in the complaint." And they said, "Well, we don't have it." He said, "Aren't you supposed to take the name of anybody who makes a complaint? Because that gentleman made an anti-Semitic comment to my son and I want it dealt with." Well, the long and the short of it was they became very apologetic, you know, the whole thing changed. Forget about juvenile court, forget about this. Let's just, you know, I'm sorry, it was a mistake, it's all over, and we went home. And I mean, that may have been the reason I participated in Sir George, because subsequent to that, my dad never said a thing to me, but my mother told me later how proud he was that I'd stood up. I knew nothing about the incident until a day in January when there was this large meeting in the big auditorium on the main floor.
As far back as 10 months ago, some black students had laid some charges of racism against a Sir George Williams professor. And that during the whole period of 10 months, the administration here seems to have managed to not do one single constructive thing about those charges.
I am disappointed in the fact that a university administration is incapable of dealing with such a minor basic issue.
Essentially what happened is the students questioned the composition of the committee.
The 6 of us who were central to this were not taken into account when 2 replacements were made to the 2 black professors.
The black students have said that the new committee is unacceptable to them. Were they not consulted at the time it was formed?
A breakdown in communications had occurred. I believe that attempts were made to get in touch with the black students. This seems to have come to naught. I don't know whose responsibility it is here.
There was a certain degree of anxiety. I had removed myself from the process because I felt that in some sense that I was compromised.
It was originally agreed that the committee should be agreeable to both the black students and Anderson. So since one of the agreements has not been made, therefore, as far as anybody who's on the side of justice is concerned, this hearing and this committee is totally invalid.
My recollection is the committee then adjourned for a short period of time, went out of the room, had a conversation, came back into the room and said something to the effect of, "Well, we've decided we're impartial and we're going to continue."
My main concern was that the hearing go ahead and that Perry have the chance to clear himself. I got the impression that Perry was vulnerable. My job was to protect his interests because the university administration and their lawyers would obviously consider first their obligations to the institution.
Everyone from his or her own particular perspectives was chasing or trying to get a situation set up that they felt were just. in which justice was done. Justice was done from their perspective.
There's no one here who is more concerned about this issue than myself. And so am I. As a matter of fact, we are not only taking on an individual member of faculty, but also the administration. And
so when we were holding Anderson accountable, in a sense, we were challenging the entire structure of that department. And there was no way in hell that they were going to accept that.
I said that under these conditions, I would answer no questions. I just have one more thing to say, however. My present condition is that I think I can sit here for about 4 hours, but I have a relatively weak bladder and I cannot answer for the consequences after that.
The university was acting in an inappropriate, unjust manner and really was not giving the due that was necessary.
Kennedy Fredericks just got up and exploded because we were going nowhere.
Will all black people come down to the front? Down to the front! All those that are interested in justice, come on down! Come on down!
Mr. Lyon.
Mr. Chairman.
Would you, I would like to allow the audience to this hearing to calm itself down, and when it has, I'm very anxious to hear your remarks.
At some point, Perry's sister, she was calling to him, sounding quite alarmed to get out. And so I ushered Perry to the exit and told him he might as well leave.
I have no idea whether Professor Anderson was a racist or not, or whether he discriminated against those students or not. We never got there.
Those people who support our demands, namely one, that the administration publicly declare this committee illegal. Two, that the administration meet immediately with us and Anderson and set up a new committee. Three, that the administration drop criminal charges against 3 black students. If you agree with those demands, we ask you to come with us right now. Are you prepared to stand up for your rights? Are you prepared to stand for your rights? Are you going to let the administration push you around? Oh, do you intend to go to the end? Right to the bitter end?
The outcome of that meeting, which made many people very unhappy, led to the occupation of the computer center.
We are on the 9th floor in the computer center, and that's where the meeting is going to be continued.
So everybody, let's get upstairs. Let's take a stand now. Let's go. Everybody that believes in justice, take a stand. Don't sit on your asses anymore. Move up there and take a stand. It's about time the white people in this campus took a stand one way or the other. So let's take your stand now. Up that escalator, follow that man and go.
If you white can sit back and have people like O'Brien run you to hell crazy, that's your privilege. The punk.
Way before Mommy was born, your grandfather took some very huge risks for a just cause. I didn't really grow up with my dad because of how his life panned out after that incident. I feel like I was maybe 6 or 7, and I think some of my aunts and uncles took it on themselves to really tell me about my father. I grew up with this image of this amazing militant activist type who was really smart and courageous. Sometimes I really feel that my parents' story kind of is stuck on my back. Même pour répéter, Jeff? Yeah, all right, awesome. So we're gonna run through it. I guess I kind of naturally exude the same type of energy that my father put out there at the time when he was sort of fighting for justice. We forward in this generation, triumphantly. Won't you help to sing? My greatest fear is not affecting change and not be able to feel that, okay, I contributed to something in a large way.
The 60s were a powerful period, and for many young people, including myself, a disruptive one. It took me a long time to recover from that era. It was powerful because it touched so many people. How is it and how could it be that an entire generation was prepared to make sacrifices and to conceive of a notion that something had to change because the air was ripe with change?
These are euphoric sort of occasions when you have people coming together for a cause and they're all optimistic and they're all supporting what we think is a just cause. And so it definitely was a great atmosphere. There was a great sense of camaraderie. And when the occupation took place, we went in order to make sure that it didn't go bad. Obviously, we wanted the matter to be settled. And that was the intention, that was the aim, that's what we expected.
Let's take a look at the action at Sir George Williams University tonight. Right now, as we talk, some 200 students are still occupying the computer center there. They've tried to keep the place clean. There's been no vandalism. As the sit-in ends its 4th day, matters are still at an impasse, and the administration is considering its next move.
It seems clear now that this is not a black and white issue. The administration are not doing anything because they don't have to.
It seemed to this 21-year-old deluded person that I was at that time, affected by everything, that really, that an armed insurgence was about the only way things were going to change.
What I gotta say is very personal, but it affects every one of you. There have been people that stood up here and have called you a racist. Now I'm gonna call you a racist. And I'm gonna call you a racist for a very good reason. Because I was a racist. Because yeah, sure, I knew about the oppression of the blacks, but I'd never done anything. As long as I haven't done anything, I'm a racist. And as long as you don't do anything, you're a racist.
Back in the 60s, it was more acceptable, at least easy to talk about race. Just because, explicit racism still existed in a way that it doesn't exist anymore. So I suppose in that type of politically and socially charged atmosphere, race was a more acceptable topic to bring up. Now today, we have a strange situation where we don't have explicit racism in the same way as we have implicit racism today, which in my opinion, is much more dangerous. It's a racism that we don't see. It's hidden in jokes, it's hidden in institutions, it's hidden in government actions. So when I came here, and the first place I went was in the countryside in Quebec. I was the only Caribbean person on campus, the only person of color on campus. And I was shocked. Like coming to this community and actually saying, oh, my skin is actually a problem here. Like it's actually, people actually see it, as opposed to before where I didn't even think of myself that way. And I suppose my search for understanding computer rights was influenced by the fact that I felt in many ways what they felt at the time and what influenced their actions.
There was a meeting in which discussions were being held as to what the next step should do in the occupation. And there was a gentleman there, a black gentleman, who advocated that maybe we should get some dynamite and put it in the elevator shaft and blow up the university. It was thought it was a little bit of an outrageous suggestion. I subsequently discovered many years later that he was a plant. But these kind of dirty tricks have been part and parcel of law enforcement in North America for forever. So it was not unusual. I left home and went down to the university in order to join the occupation. At that point, the university was closed off. 2 police from the nearby station came. One took me under one arm, the other one took me under the other arm, and they marched me out of the university into a squad car, took me down to Point St. Charles, let me out, and told me that if they saw me around the university, that I would be arrested. And it was one of the very first times in my life that I was actually afraid for my life.
There was a fear, I believe, on the administration part that we would get violent. I think that was their greatest problem.
We have to begin when we ask questions to define what violence is. Violence is not physical in the first place. Violence starts with a mental state.
What was their great fear? Because fear is a strange mental state, and fear has a way of producing the exact thing that you fear.
You are afraid of black people. Why? Ask yourself why. Stop thinking and start coming to some constructive conclusions.
I think if you know somebody's watching you and you may or may not know their intention, you guard yourself more, or in some cases, with some people, they become quite paranoid. But I think you definitely hold back, and you put on a face, right? It's hard to just be your natural self at all times.
We were just waiting for them to come and say, okay, we will listen to you. We anticipated that this would have happened, you know, because we didn't expect everybody in the administration to be racist.
The line of the association was that in the first place, we were extremely happy to see that in the latest document that the black students had submitted to the vice principal and who had asked us as an association for our comments upon it, we had underlined that we were extremely happy to see that the students were in fact being ready to negotiate.
We were told by the lawyers that an agreement had been reached.
And the students had come to believe that it was all over and they were going to get the demands that they had asked for.
And this was going to set the stage for the demands that were made, plus a hearing committee and so on and so on.
So we were kind of confident that you know, we were on our way to some small victory in terms of the initial issues.
We won, and it was no particular political persuasion that made us win. It was just that we persevered, asked for what we wanted, and we got it. And then there was joy.
And many people left.
Many people had gone home, you know, feeling really great. We won, it's gonna, you know, it was resolved. And I actually went home that night to take a shower, get some sleep, and went back in the morning because I wanted to be part of the cleanup crew. I felt really, and a group of us really felt strongly that we wanted to leave the place the way we found it, so that people understood that this was not about a party or just having a good time at somebody else's expense, but it was about a principle.
But they were pretending they were on our side, and they were doing everything to help us, when in truth and in fact, they were not.
The final deal was scuttled by the Faculty Association.
They had reneged on the decision.
We found out in the afternoon that the University Union was holding it up.
And it got held up for 2 days, which then caused the students, the more radical ones on the edges, to say, you see what we're saying, these people are not to be trusted.
Their position was that we had no rights and they had no responsibilities.
We were tricked.
It was not a victory.
I have a suspicion that despair had been setting in and that many people had begun to reach the conclusion that these highs and the lows were just an effort to defeat them.
Betrayal is probably a reasonably accurate representation of how I would have felt. At this stage in time, I realized that to have expected otherwise was highly naive.
The heightening of expectations that there would be a resolution, and then the terrible letdown or descent that everybody went through in disappointment. One can expect that a few tempers will flare.
The students just said, to hell with it. Let's go for broke.
They immediately blocked the campus from the 7th floor up.
And there were people marching around downstairs. There were two sets of people. Some saying, kill them, or something to that effect, and others protesting on our behalf. I got the impression that there was confrontation between the two forces on the streets.
Okay, you're going to keep it up? The demonstration? That's right. Until what time? Until our brothers come out.
I was outside the university, and it was the first time that I understood what it was like as a black to face a white mob where your life was in the balance. And between the mob and a group of us was a line of blue police.
Our talks were off. So anger, and the student just tossed this thing out.
All the pent-up emotion just exploded. The computer cards were thrown out of the window. Windows were broken.
And then all the work we had for the last couple of weeks of monitoring and keeping these computers in pristine condition, now you see these cards fluttering out the window, like, it ticked me off.
What I think it was a desperate attempt on the part of us to garner attention, because there were lots of people on the street around the building, but we really felt from what we were hearing that they were not paying attention to us.
These computer cards and ribbons falling like snow out of heaven. It looked like the brains of society scattered in the wind or something like that. Somewhere along the line, the issue stopped being about Anderson. Everybody forgot Anderson. He was like a person just floating around somewhere. It was something floating around, but it wasn't really about him.
It was an act of civil disobedience, and there was no plan to do it.
I suppose in my heart, I figured we'd occupy it, and 2 days later it'd all be resolved, and everybody would be happy, and we'd be singing Kumbaya. Not exactly what happened.
The computer center is a very delicate and important part of the institution now. Will the police be called into?
I don't know. I have no idea along these lines, but I do know that Vice Principal O'Brien does feel that men are more important than machines, and that the computer has not come to dominate this university.
The university made a decision to put an end to the occupation, to ask the Montreal police to intervene. And I was asked to accompany the riot squad as an observer and a witness.
It is a special squad. Those people were at least 7 feet, and they trampling, you know, like a stampede.
They came charging you.
Next thing you know, you're being attacked by the police.
So at that point, though, a group of students started using the fire hoses on the police.
The first time I saw a police officer through that little window, and this has never left me, I never saw such terror in a man's eyes. I have no idea what they were told about us, but based on the look on that man's face, I truly believe they thought we were armed to the teeth and we were going to come out shooting.
I was terrified. We are locked in. We can't go through the front because we'll be arrested. We try to get through the back, only to find the doors barricaded.
Within minutes, probably less, we saw very black smoke pouring out of the ducts.
There was a door in the back there that was always closed. We had never opened it. It was closed from the inside.
And when we rushed to get away from the building up of the smoke to the front, that door was locked from outside.
So we were virtually trapped in there.
It was like a cloud of black smoke like I had never seen before. And it was ascending. It was coming down. I must say it was quite terrifying because eventually it fortunately stopped, I would say, about 2 feet off the ground. We all ended up, including the police, on our knees on the floor.
It was so fast.
Were you guys scared?
Very.
I was afraid that my colleagues and friends upstairs were being burnt alive.
One match does a trick.
Any one of about 20 people could have done it, or 50 people could have done it. They were so angry.
Just pure, primal, venal hatred. At what? At being a nigger?
That shook me to my core, of course, because that means that there are people around who don't mind seeing other people perish. That hit me hard. And I had to come to terms with understanding that human beings are capable of doing all manner of things that I never dreamed were possible.
All of that accompanied by the chants of a white mob chanting, "Let the niggers burn."
People were yelling, "Burn, nigger, burn."
This chanting of "Let the niggers burn," you know, they wanted us to die. That you don't forget.
The police apparently told the university they would not go up to the 9th floor and dismantle the barricades and remove the students unless the university representatives were there to be able to testify that there had been no violence, no brutality.
Fortunately, they were able to axe the door down for us to get out.
And that's when the riot squad went in and started to get the guys out.
They started beating us as we came through the door.
It was 4 girls. And somebody took us, and we were in the elevator. We were then downstairs. At the time, a policeman actually maliciously told us that people had been killed.
Several students got beaten up really badly. And I know that because 2 of them were put into my paddy wagon, and they were a mess. They'd been severely beaten. And I knew both of these guys, and they were not aggressive. They were...
I grew up in Trinidad. I was a very humble person. I was in the Scouts. In the Scouts, we serve people. We work with the elderly. We work with children. I remember some specific things. I was, you know, like cuffed in the nose or punched or... But I more remember hearing other people who got beaten up. Your hand could be bleeding, but you ain't thinking about your injury, you know, but you want to make sure everybody is, it's okay. Everybody who was inside that center at that time on that particular floor was arrested.
Originally, we had planned to go down to O'Brien's office, but it's too small.
Kennedy was bright, vibrant. He probably was, well, he was very bright. But he lost faith. You see, Kennedy, my memory of Kennedy was that he was a believer in the principles that the university was supposed to have established, and that the reality of what he had to confront with was too much for him.
I know that he went off to Tanzania. Well, he went off to Tanzania with our blessings and with all our money, because we had put up the bail. All of us had put together for the bail. And we knew they wanted to hang him and crucify him in Canada, in Montreal, so everybody told him, run.
I mean, I really had reached out for him because he's felt a lot of pain, the disappointment and the disillusionment, and, you know, it really hurts me, you know, to see where he have reached and not to enjoy life to the fullest.
When this issue has been causing mental strain and physical breakdown to students, then one begins to wonder as to the right of the existence of such a university.
My father has just gone through serious bouts of mental health issues since the whole St. George incident. And it's been really difficult for him to continue his life without having those kinds of demons sort of chasing him.
Of course, when all the other students were being discharged and released from prison, the only ones left were the black students. 1 o'clock in the morning, they came and took me out of my cell and sat me down with the police, you know, real movie style, under a little light and the whole bit. He's lighting a cigarette, he's bringing it closer and closer to my face, and he eventually burned me.
Do you think it's still possible to negotiate, or is the day of talk over?
Well, I suppose if we negotiate now, it'll be across bars.
Taking part in a sitting is not wrong. It is not even really illegal. I would have thought to plead guilty to something that I thought I was not guilty of to be unprincipled at that time.
Rosie was a larger-than-life character.
He was very brilliant. I don't think he was at St. George at the time. I think he was at McGill. But he supported us thoroughly.
You displayed right here that this institution is racist. And in the highest institution of decision-making here, your parliament displayed it.
Roosevelt Douglas, who was involved in the black students' movement, gained national publicity for his part in the sit-in. Since his release from jail last year, he's made a full-time career as a militant black power advocate.
I am a fighter for liberation. I'm one who believes that my country has the capacity to produce and provide all our people with a decent standard of living, and to do that there have to be certain basic structural changes.
I think Rosie Douglas was the only one who persisted in trying to stretch out the political mileage of that whole thing.
They say Rosie Douglas is a threat to national security.
His whole life he felt he was under surveillance.
Was it a reality that we were infiltrated? Yes, that much was proven. Was it a reality that so-called leaders were under surveillance? Yes, that was confirmed.
There was some dramatic testimony today before the McDonald Commission into the RCMP. It came from an American named Warren Hart, who says that for 4 years he worked as an agent in Canada and other countries.
His job was to infiltrate radical groups like the Black Panthers. Roosevelt Rosie Douglas was to be Hart's chief target. Today, Hart testified that he had been told to break the law to get information. He opened mail, broke into buildings, and secretly taped Douglas's conversations. His orders, he said, came from the Mounties directly.
I was born in St. Vincent. From the moment that I arrived, interestingly enough, my thought was always, at least I would be going back home. And I think this is the classic position of the immigrant. The immigrant moves to a new community. They do not belong there, but they take solace in the notion that they can go back home. And for many of us, going back home means to confront the fact that you have left so long that you really cannot go home again.
Came out of jail sometime around June, and by December of that year, I found my way into Trinidad, and I came home to get an assessment of what was happening in Trinidad.
It is exactly 2 weeks ago today since the first demonstrations began against what the Black Power people here call Canadian imperialism and against the trial of the 10 Trinidadians in Montreal. The demonstrations have mounted steadily, both in the number of people concerned with them and in their ferocity.
It started off with the issue being the Sir George Williams, and when the local issues took over, mass movement came out on the street. You're talking about 20,000, 30,000 people marching every day.
There was an anger and enthusiasm. You could feel it. It wasn't something tangible, but there was something you could feel. People wanted to do something.
At the time, unemployment was very high. People were very frustrated with the situation, the lack of opportunities.
We want to end the exploitation economically, culturally, in every sense, by the white foreign powers, particularly from North America and Britain. As we go lower down the street, we'll pass a number of other Canadian banks. You are one of our major exploiters.
The moment they were arrested for that demonstration against the banks, the situation broke.
I think at the local level, a butterfly flapped its wing and it blew. And it blew because you had Black Power movement in the States, you had the movement for liberation of Africa at the same time, you had the whole Caribbean moving towards different degrees of independence.
All of the Caribbean is under the control of the imperialists. And all of the Caribbean must fight to free itself, and since we are the same people, we must aid each other in our battles to free ourselves from racist imperialism.
But in April of 1970, they passed the state of emergency because they wanted the army to come out and quell the people's demonstrations in the street, because the people were demonstrating every day. Passed the state of emergency and they tried to lock the square. The square was the place known for people's expression. Eric Williams, when he came in '56, he referred to it as the University of Woodford Square. That University of Woodford Square in 1970 became a people's parliament. And what did the government do? Lock it down to prevent the expression of the people.
At the end of the day, the question that is posed is, were these students suicidal or just absolutely stupid? That they would set a fire in which the consequences of setting that fire was not simply the destruction of the computers, but that their lives would be in danger. Once you call a person, once you identify a person, not only as the other, but as such a feral animal that you wish to have him burned, then it is very easy to appreciate that you can go one step further and create the conditions without any direct evidence. I am of the opinion, I hold the opinion, and we're all entitled to our opinions, that the fire was set by law enforcement.
nobody ever told me exactly who it was.
And it would have been ludicrous for us to start the fire because we were locked in.
Nobody has been able to, or has wished to, or has said that they've seen anybody do anything like that. And a certain solidarity exists that, look, it was an injustice in which we paid the price, so we were going to stand together.
Do you think that the suspension served any useful purpose?
Absolutely not. In fact, I think it was personally damaging. It is now on my record.
You now have a suspension, even if it is lifted later, you think it'll hurt your later career?
Definitely so, and I can refer to an article in the New York Times in relationship to this where a statement was made that students had brought a charge of racism against me, that the administration had moved to suspend me, and that an inquiry was pending. The connotation there, of course, is that the administration possibly felt that I was guilty.
You don't get an accusation like that unless it's happening. I mean, you know, people don't jump to conclusions like that because there isn't good grounds for it in the culture at large. And in that sense, Perry's as guilty as me or anyone else of being culturally biased, right? And I don't think it was a personal bias, but he was part of the cultural bias.
Have you dealt with black students before, and what were your relationships with them, if you have?
Could you qualify that statement?
Have you dealt with black students before, with West Indians before, in any way, and how were your relationships with them?
There are forces and movements and political movements and societies that really are, you know, much more powerful than individuals, and that he felt very much that you should be aware of that in life, because he wasn't, and he felt very much that he caught up in something that he didn't understand.
Well, I feel that the pressures that were on my shoulders since last December were subconscious more than anything, and it is only recently that I realized how mentally depressed I was over the course of the period.
But you didn't realize it at the time, when the pressure was at its most, was the most intense?
No, I don't think that I realized how depressed I really was.
How can you tell what is racist? In any particular context, every single one of us might be racist. Is the extent to which is what control do you have over your selfish genetic demands for self-security? That is what makes the difference between someone who is a conscious, vicious racist and someone who is simply responding on a sort of, I need to ensure that I survive and I need to respond in a way which meets my particular needs. And if I see someone or something that is different to who I am and I can't read it, I block them out or exclude them. Now, I think we're all capable of that kind of response. The question is, have we learned how to control this so that we can have the maximum amount of harmony and peace and move forward together against an external physical world that's not always giving us the security we need?
Things aren't that much different from my son. It may look different because there's a little bit more tolerance, or what seems to be more tolerance, but I really don't see it. So if I stay here with my son, who's African Caribbean, whose father has to witness young white Hasidic girls rush across the street when they see him coming out of his apartment and then cross back once they've passed him. Those are the moments it's just like, there's nothing we could do.
Your entire being is involved in trying to affect something, and at the end of the day, you have failed, and failed spectacularly. And even to this day, the relationships with my two sons is bracketed by those early days when I was not there. And we subsequently got divorced, my wife and I. And I do not bother to say to them, you know, I said, I don't even say, I haven't even said that I'm sorry. Because to say that I'm sorry presupposes that I should have done something different.
I think Perry felt that it was very much an absolutely horrific thing that was happening to him. I think Mom felt she wanted to carry on and persevere in the way that we had, where Perry, I think, saw it differently. This is just when I start to have memory. I'm not sure if I'm 4.5 or 5. I remember sitting on the staircase. We were in a duplex over in NDG. I think it was 2 floors, it must have been. So I remember sitting on the staircase and just hearing loud voices downstairs. I'm not sure what was going on. And then I remember Mom being gone.
Some people ask me, well, how long does a bee live? But then I never take that on, because a bee is a bee is a bee. So that same bee, if I mark it, it will probably die and go. But there's another bee that's doing the same thing and producing honey. And the honey from thousands of years ago is the same thing. Now, while you're working, I think sometimes you reflect a lot, you meditate a lot, you think a lot. You touch on a whole lot of things. You get a chance to resolve things. Issues come up and you solve them. A time to getting to you and to understand you. And what are your beliefs, what are you believing, and what you're doing here. You know, and the fact that you would not be here forever, and that you're passing through. And these things are resolved in your mind, that you're just a traveler. And it removes fear.
by, sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs.
From mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop at the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book.